And it's 2 p.m. Central European Time, and I'm Søren Sørensen. I would like to welcome you all to the second European Conclave on MaaS. It's a webinar organized by ITS Nordic Plus, and today we're going to dive into how bike share, car share, e-scooter share, carpooling, taxi service, and other on-demand mobility services can become easier to discover and use. We are recording this webinar and will publish it on most likely the Nordic Plus website. We would encourage you to use the chat for questions or raise a hand. There will be time after each presentation for clarifications, and in the end, also some opening for questions to stimulate the panel so that we discuss the questions that you indeed have. But to start, I would like to introduce Trond Hovdal, which is the CEO of ITS Norway and one of the founders of the Nordic Plus umbrella. And please ask you to open the second European Conclave. Over to you.
Thank you, Søren, for that kind introduction. Yes, I'm Trond Hovdal, the CEO of ITS Norway and also co-founder of the Nordic Plus. Also been coordinating the project NOMAD for some time. So we all know that that it's very hard to make MaaS really work. Mobility as a service is hard to make work, at least for all the stakeholders at the same time. Like the society that needs to reduce its emission to make the cities livable again. For the traveler who needs a smoother ride if he's going to let the car behind. For the transport providers in the private sector that needs to be profitable. All of this as once is hard to make. Why is it hard? Probably because sharing is hard in itself. To share a vehicle or share a ride is hard. Sharing data is even harder. And building trust between the stakeholders is also very hard. But nevertheless, authorities and transport providers like the EU as well are turning to MaaS as the solution to make cities livable again and to make reduced emissions. Because it makes so much sense to share. It makes sense to share vehicles, it makes sense to share rides, it makes sense to integrate scheduled and on-demand services and book and pay in one go. That's what we do when we fly an airplane. That's what we do when we use our own car. That's what we use when we use the bank card all over the place, use the phone in any country we like. So why is it hard to match the combined traveling resources around you with your travel and with your individual need as a traveler? So we have a kind of a paradox here. We know that that we have to turn to something that is hard to solve, something that is even more important to reduce the emission in the society. And the NOMAD project has actually added even more difficulties to this because we are looking at cross-border roaming and how to use your favorite local app to buy a journey anywhere. That makes the MaaS case even harder. But after 5 years of simulation and research, we are quite optimistic that we have found it. And of course, it's due to the EU regulation that kind of forces us in the right direction. But also we need to create a common understanding of what the MaaS concept is really about and how it should work in society. We need to make sharing of data in a free and standardized and unbiased way, like we do with the national access point and what Entur is doing in Norway. We need to establish some kind of clearinghouses for having both private and public transport providers get their kind of fair share of the revenue and costs when it comes to setting up integrated transport. We need to be able to cross borders, concession areas and boundaries without any limitation to the mobility. So we maybe need some kind of responsible unit or maybe a regulation that helps us cross-border in a free way. That's where the EU regulation kicks in. And that's why we have this conclave today, to learn even more about what EU regulation means, what the policy will mean for us. What is going on in Italy? What is going on with standards like NeTEx, SIRI, National Access Point, NAPCOR, GBFS? Maybe the most important thing is anyway to come together like we are now and to discuss freely That's what the Conclave is all about. It is important to get together and discuss, and maybe one day there will be white smoke coming out. So that's my introduction, Søren, and I'm happy to give the word back to you.
Okay, and happy to accept. Thank you very much, Trond. And yeah, as you mentioned, we're not coming to any conclusions today. But in reality, what we are doing here is trying to accelerate the use of sustainable and smart mobility modes and eventually reach the European Green Deal. And the European Green Deal is something that's where shared mobility and mobility as a service is an integral part. It's named as one of the action points to reach the European Green Deal. And to give us an introduction for that, we have asked Petra Söderqvist from DG Move, which is a part of the EU Commission, to tell us a little bit about the MMTIS revised regulation, and also with a special focus on the ambitions for on-demand mobility services. So Petra, I would like to introduce you, and maybe if you want, you can put a few more words on what is you actually doing at DG Move, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Søren, and good afternoon, everybody. Very happy to be here. So thank you also to ITS Nordic Plus for inviting us at the European Commission and DG Move to be a part of this webinar this afternoon, and very excited to see so many attendees online. I'm going to share my screen here, and then I hope you will be able to follow. So thank you for that introduction yet again, Søren. And as mentioned by Søren, my name is Petra Söderqvist, and I'm a policy officer at the European Commission, specifically in DG Move, which is the Director General for Mobility and Transport. So I'm very excited to be here today to also give an update on the delegated regulation on multimodal travel information services, MMTIS as the abbreviation is, which has just recently been adopted. So the timing of this webinar is very well placed. And I understand also that some of you following this online might be very familiar with this delegated act, others might not, or you might be very familiar with some part of it, depending on which role you have in your current professional position, let's say. But anyway, I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview, and Søren put it very well. But just to start a little bit, and as I mentioned, for some of you, this might be a big repetition. For others who might be familiar with the directive, maybe from a data user or data holder perspective, or from a standardization perspective, it's good, I think, still to take a step back to at least understand why, from our side at the Commission, why we have revised this delegated act and what our ambition was. And it really started, as Søren also said, in 2019, the Commission, we adopted an overall strategy called European Green Deal, which sets out the overall EU ambition and the objective for us in the EU to be the first climate neutral continent by 2050. And this overall strategy covers many different sectors, mobility and transport being one of them. And in it, it also really emphasizes that what we need to do in order for us to reach our climate objective by 2050 and for us to become climate neutral, and for the transport sector to reduce its emission by 90% compared to 1990s level, because this is the scenario where we're at, because the transport sector is unfortunately the one of the sectors that needs to do most of its work to reduce its emissions. So in the European Green Deal strategy, it also emphasizes what we need to do for the transport sector to reduce its emission is, amongst other things, to boost multimodal transport. So both on passenger and freight, but of course the session here today is specified and focusing on passenger transport. It also emphasizes in the European Green Deal that automated and connected multimodal mobility will play an increasing role in reducing our emissions in the transport sector specifically, and for us to reach the overall climate objective by 2050 in the EU. So this was followed up 1 year later in the end of 2020 with a specific strategy for addressing the transport sector specifically, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It's called the Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy, which lists 10 different flagship initiatives and more than 80 specific actions that was then stated to say, okay, what would the Commission work on this coming mandate? Because I mean, now looking back at the European Green Deal strategy and the Sustainable and Smart Mobility strategy, although we are still working on it, we do have a lot of things accomplished, and we are approaching a very interesting year now, going into an election year and setting up a new commission and a new parliament with more work ahead, of course, the coming next 5 years. Anyway, in the Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy of 2020, there is one specific flagship number 6, that states that we need to make a connected and automated multimodal mobility a reality. This again was specified with Action 36, stating that we need to revise the Delegated Act on MMTIS, and we need to include and mandate the accessibility of dynamic data. Of course, this Delegated Act, MMTIS, is one of the Delegated Acts under the ITS Directive from 2010. The ITS Directive, which many of you know, was also revised recently and has been was fully adopted and entered into force just end of last year. And this is, I always like to start with a bit of a background and context to this, yet again, knowing what we are going into in this year, even though it's not the focus of this webinar today. But it is interesting because during the process of the last couple of years, when we have worked on the revision of MMTIS, we have come across stakeholders who have, in different contexts, of course, raised the issue of, oh, why are you revising this, and for which reason, and how were we not aware of it? And this is why it's good to be aware of the SSMS, as it's called, the Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy, because already in 2020 it was stated that we would revise this Delegated Act and we would focus on mandating the accessibility of dynamic data. So if going into a little bit of the detail of this Delegated Act and MMTIS, as I mentioned, it's part of the ITS Directive, and this Delegated Act has been in place since 2017. In the SSMS, so in the strategy of 2020, we announced we would revise it, and the work started a couple of years later, where we finally managed to reach an agreement. Because it was because it is a delegated act, it does not go into negotiations with the European Parliament and with the Council, but it was possible for the Parliament or the Council to object to this revision, which luckily from our side at the Commission, these two other institutions did not. So from the Commission side, we adopted the proposal for a revised MMTIS on the 29th of November last year, and it was approved by the Parliament and the Council end of January this year, and the revision was published in the EU official journal on the 13th of February this year, so very recently, which means it will enter into force on the 4th of March, so just next week actually. So as again, the timing of this webinar is excellent. And as I said, many of you are aware of it, but just a quick recap, of course, that this Delegated Act on MMTIS aims to provide passengers, the overall objective is to provide the passengers, meaning the end user, with relevant information to plan journeys seamlessly and including across modes. So although the end user, the passengers, is not necessarily the target for, let's say, the legal articles in the legal text itself, that is the overall objective with MMTIS. And it is good to also remind us all that with MMTs, the one since 2017, as well as the revised one, which will enter into force next week, we are only talking about the data types specifically listed in the annex of this delegated act, and we are only referring to data that already exists in a digital machine readable format, and it does not prescribe the creation of new data. I know there's been some discussions on this the last couple of years with regard to the also in parallel revised ITS directive, because the ITS directive is, let's say, the mother directive of this delegated act, and it is in the ITS directive where the possible creation and the digitizing of data is regulated, but it's not in MMTs. So MMTs only applies to data that already exists in a digital machine readable format and does not prescribe the creation of new data. And MMTs includes, aside from the legal articles, it includes an annex that then lists these data types, and the annex is divided in static data and dynamic data. And up until the revision now, it was only mandatory for data holders to make the data type, the data listed in the annex on static data accessible via the national access point. However, now with the revision, this will also apply to the entire annex, also on the dynamic data, with the exception of the final data type listed on occupancy information of the vehicle. But I will come back to that. And the annex also describes to whom this applies, as well as the legal act in itself, and it applies to scheduled transport and transport on demand. And this has been the case already since 2017 and is still the case. And what is also very good to be aware of before moving forward is that with the revision that was now adopted and will enter into force next week, because it is a revision and not a repeal, for those of you who have worked on other delegated acts or are familiar with other delegated acts under the ITS directive, such as the delegated act on RTTI, so real-time traffic information, that was a repeal, meaning you make a new product and a new legislative act and you replace it. MMTs is a revision, which means that the legal act that has been published includes the changes made. So for the articles that is not included in the revision, it means that the current one from 2017 applies, but it also means that the recitals in the revision now of 2024 only describes the changes made with the revision, but the recitals from 2017 also applies, because this is also something that we have been asked questions about. So going into the revision specifically, as mentioned, the main change is to mandate the accessibility of dynamic data. And this was, of course, as I already mentioned, already announced in the Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy of 2020. So aside from this bigger change, we also, with the revision, we've also added some new data types in the annex on all parts of the annex, on static, historic, and observed data, in dynamic data. And of course, with this, we've added a new time frame, because the current MMTs, the legal act, obliges data holders to make their data accessible via the national access point with a time frame of 1st of December that dated back from 1st December 2019 to 1st December 2023 on the specific data types in the first part of the annex on static data. Now we have added new data types in the entire annex here and there, and I will give examples of that. But of course, we have also added a time frame from that, which starts from 1st December this year, 24, and it goes up to 1st December 28. One of the another change we made was that we removed data types in the MMTs of 2017 that was linked to and described data types on tolls, recharging, and refueling stations. And the reason for this is that they were included in the repeal of the delegated act on RTTI, real-time traffic information, that was repealed in 2022. And we've also added a new data types linked to parking, because they were earlier included in the RTTI Delegated Act, but there was a political decision a few years ago to change the location of these specific data types and between RTTI and MMTs. So that's why data types on parking has been removed from RTTI and is now included in this revised Delegated Act on MMTs. So going into the specifics then of why we're here in this webinar this afternoon when it comes to transport on demand. So as I mentioned, transport on demand is already covered and included in the current MMTs from 2017. However, with the work the last few years, we have, unfortunately I would say, but we have come across the fact that there has been many stakeholders who from the transport on demand sector who might not have been aware of the fact of the existence of this delegated act and was unsure of what they would be, if they would be covered or not and in which role. So I can just confirm that yes, they are covered and there's no change there. They were already covered in 2017. And what we have also done with the revision is that we have updated and revised the definition of data holder to specify and to also make sure that it's a little bit more clear that, I mean, data holder is a transport authority, a transport operator, an infrastructure manager, or a transport on demand service provider. And that's why we have, instead of listing these examples throughout the legal text, which was the case in the legal text on MMTs from 2017, we have replaced this with data holder throughout. So that's why you have to go to Article 2 and look at the definition of data holder. But here you can see that transport on demand service providers are included in the definition of data holder. And when we talk about what transport on demand could include and which are the service providers, the annex starts by listing examples of transport on demand services, such as, and I want to emphasize this because it means that this is not an exhaustive list, because so we do have, for example, shuttle bus and shuttle ferries, dial ride services, taxis, sharing, pooling, hire for both cars and bikes and scooters or e-scooters. However, ride hailing is also included, but it's not specified because that's why we have the such as listed in the annex. It's not an exhaustive list, because also the transport on demand sector is of course also evolving, which is very exciting. But this is why this is not an exhaustive list. And when we are also then taking one step further to address the topic of this afternoon's webinar, and when we talk about standards and reference standards, MMTs does include reference standards. So for those of you who want to look into the legal text, this is specified in Articles 4 and 5. This is currently the case. This was the case in already in the 2017 version, and they're still there in the revised MMTs. And what we are referring to here are the standards or technical specifications under European governance, so such as NeTEx, the technical specifications in TAP TSI, IATA technical documents, transmodal, DATEX 2 and SIRI. However, we are aware, because during the work of the revision, we are aware that there are, which is sometimes the case for the transport on demand service providers, using, and which is also the case in some member states, that there are other standards being used, which I know we will also discuss this afternoon. Which is why, as a compromise from the Commission side in cooperation with the member states experts during the work of the revision, we've also added and clarified with the revision that what is also acceptable is that other standards or technical specifications that can be shared in a digital machine readable format that can be proven fully compatible and interoperable with the standards and technical specifications just mentioned, including, for example, through automatic converters and validators. Now, we also understand that, okay, can be proven, who decides who needs to prove it, and how can this be done? And we've tried to clarify it as much as possible in a legal framework. So which is why I want to emphasize also recital 8 in the revised MMTs, which says that it's the data holder's responsibility. So as you can see here in bold and underlined, that where the data holders can prove that it is fully compatible with the reference standards. So it is the data holder, which is then, as I mentioned, the examples here. It is the data holders who are legally responsible for making sure that the data is shared in a fully compatible manner with the reference standards. Of course, this can also look differently when you look at, we know of examples where some member states have already developed and allow for converters or validators included in their national access point, for example, whilst in other member states this is not the case. We understand there could be some discrepancies here. However, this is the best way forward that we see it, and also to make it as clear as possible as to whom is in charge of this and responsible for this. And moving forward now, just to list and give the examples of the data types in the annex that we have added with the revision. This is just an overview summarizing the different data types included. And the annex, for those of you who are not that familiar with it, as I mentioned, is divided into a static and dynamic data part, and is also divided into different level of service, as we call it, which just reflects the different time frames for when the data needs to be made accessible via the national access point. So, for example, as I mentioned, data types on parking, such as scooter parking, parking tariffs, and park and drive stations have now been added in MMTs. We've also added historic data on delays, observed data on delays and cancellations, accessibility of the vehicle and onboard services. And for these examples, this is also linked to other EU legislation, such as passenger rights and, for example, in the railway sector, where we're also trying to improve the accessibility within the transport sector for persons with reduced mobilities and persons with disabilities. In dynamic data, aside from mandating the accessibility of it, we've also added dynamic parking tariffs, which is the case somewhere, sometimes. So just there could be static and dynamic parking tariffs. Availability and location of scooter sharing and other vehicle sharing, and car parking spaces, and then, as I mentioned earlier, occupancy of the vehicle. However, this last example is the only one where it's not mandatory for data holders to make this data accessible via the national access point, but this is up to member states to decide if should this apply or not in their member state. And whether the transport on demand service providers are obliged to make the different data types accessible, well, first of all, it is specified in the annex where it says if it applies to transport on demand or not. And if it is not specified with the scheduled transport specifically, or if it says nothing, it means that it applies for scheduled transport and transport on demand. And as I mentioned earlier, transport on demand also includes shuttle services, such as shuttle bus or shuttle taxis or shuttle ferries. So it is a very broad group, broad category of transport services, which is why you, as a transport on demand service provider, one needs to look at the specific data types to see, because we've also come across stakeholders who say, oh, we don't have parking tariffs. No, of course, you're not a parking, let's say, operator or infrastructure manager. So thus, if you do not have the data, of course, there's no obligation for you to, well, there's never an obligation for you to digitize it, to create the data, to digitalize it. But should you have it, then the obligation applies, of course. And also when it comes to vehicle sharing, so this is very specified for transport on demand when it applies to vehicle sharing, such as car sharing or bike sharing or scooter sharing, for example, when it comes to the dynamic data. So here we are not talking about ride hailing or anything else in the transport on demand sector. So this is an overview of why we revised MMTs, when it will apply, what are the reference standards, and which examples of new data types we have added. Happy to take some questions or comments, well, questions preferably, if there's anything that is unclear that needs to be clarified from my end. But if not, I will join you later in the afternoon. Well, I will follow the whole afternoon, but I will also come back in a panel discussion later. So thank you from my side.
Well, thank you very much, Petra. And I see one questions from Edwin van der Belt. Edwin, would you like to put the question on to Petra yourself?
Yes, I'm glad to. Thank you, sir.
Short.
Petra, yeah, very short. The question is actually, you mentioned that the interoperability with the reference standard should be proven, but who is going to test this? Is there a gremium in maybe Transmodel or something? Who's testing this mapping? Is this a correct mapping?
Very good question. We haven't specified this in the legal act. We've only clarified who has the obligation to prove it, let's say. However, we do make other references in the revised text on ITS stakeholders and future and ongoing projects. And the reason why we are quite vague on this is that that's the strongest legal text we were allowed to put in, let's say, in a legal text, where we are also referencing, let's say, the NAPCOR project, which is ongoing, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Now the NAPCOR project does not currently have any role in doing this, but this is just a way to see that, I mean, when it comes to validating the and checking this, this will be let's say, up to the data holder and data user on, I mean, the legal responsibility lies with the data holder to share the data. And I mean, should there be a discrepancy that the data holder claims this is correct, whilst the data user says, no, I don't have a good quality data here, then of course this will have to be investigated further in those cases and with the within the member state. But this is something that we are also looking into to see. However, when it comes to the specification in MMTs on converters and validators, this was also added based on the examples we are aware of in member states where there are converters and validators there. So we know this exists, and we've also looked into checked with, let's say, standardization experts to see how we can go about this as much as possible. But should there be a discrepancy here, then it is. Oh, now I'm back. Apologies for that. Should there be a discrepancy, what MMTs regulates is who is the who has the legal obligation. That would be the data holder.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we really need to move on. And I see some other questions and comments in the chat, and please use the chat because that can inspire us also for the panel discussion where Petra will be back. So I would now like to move on to the next agenda point, and we have had to put this up here in the front because our speaker Fabrizio needs to leave us here at 3 p.m. So Fabrizio, now we have learned something about how the regulation works, but you're actually trying to put it into reality. So could you share that with us and the Italian perspective, and especially the focus on what you're doing for the on-demand modes of here in Italy?
Yeah, thank you, Søren, for inviting me and give me the chance to share with all of you what we did and what we are currently still doing to address the implementation of delegated regulation. And okay, here are my slides. First of all, just a couple of words. My name is Fabrizio Arnedo, for those of you that doesn't know me. I'm the CTO of 5T, that is an in-house local public administration company. And I have also a role under the European Committee of Normalization, working in the TC 278 WG3 umbrella standards that are the standards compliant with transmodel, that is, the ecosystem referred by the delegated regulation. Today, I would like to share with you, trying to be quite synthetic, what we did, as I already mentioned, tackle the delegated regulation, and the first steps we moved forward, providing services, MMTIS services, starting from national access point MMTIS gated data. So basically, a couple of words about the context we have in Italy concerning this. To address the delegated regulation and also the most recent changes, the most recent revising, we identified an architecture in two levels, a governance architecture, let me say, and a technical one. Basically, we identified and give responsibility to local administration in charge to gather data and to provide data to the national access point. So this means basically that we identified so-called RAP, that stands for Regional Access Points. We have in Italy 20 regions, and for each region, we ask it to set up a digital platform called RAP in order to to gather data, to provide informability services, to ensuring data interoperability, enabling where applicable, MaaS local initiatives, and also, to provide DSS, decision support systems, and in other words, a support to the local governance of mobility. This is the context, and in terms of governance, in terms of technical, let me say, functional technical architecture, the regional access point basically gathering stores all planned and real-time transport service data, where applicable, implement and gather information concerning tariffs, and so basically fare systems. And last but not least, on the gathered data, also build, let me say, business intelligence systems or reporting systems, as I mentioned before, to enable and to support the local governance. Okay, this is at local level. At national level, we have the national access point as required by the delegated regulation. And what we put in place is a formal machine-to-machine data exchange among the several regional access points and the central NAP MMTIS. The data are gathered as required using NeTEx, the Italian profile of the NeTEx, that is a subset of the European standard. And for the dynamic and real-time data, we defined an Italian profile of the series. In other words, basically we have the communication quite rigid, standardized or let me say, rigid standardized between among RIP and the national access point, and inside at the local level, each RIP can decide how to gather data or convert data or have native generated data from the PTOs, public transport operators, or from other mobility operators. The NeTEx profile, Italian profile, has been defined to cover basically selecting the data structure needed to exchange the data categories required in the annex of the delegated regulation. And we divided it in 5 different levels. The first one is the minimum set of information required to be exchanged among the national access point of the member states. It is called APIP. It stands for European Passenger Information Profile. And the others add further information. The second level are more Italian-related use cases concerning contracts between PTOs and the local administrations. The third level concerning fares. The fourth level, alternative modes of sharing mobility. And the last, but not least, is the accessibility data. Similar work has been done for Siri, and this functional area has been identified concerning vehicle monitoring, estimating timetable, situation exchange, and feature monitoring. Those profiles are defined, have been implemented in 12 regional access points over a total of 20. And this is the current situation concerning, the region currently automatically connected to the national access point. And currently development is in progress with the national railway operator that will communicate, will exchange directly data with the national access point, providing national information and regional information concerning railways, of course, for the services performed by this PTO. The main service enabled by the NAP with this gathered data are the national MaaS services that I will enter more in detail further. The cross-border interoperability services, of course, as required by delegated regulation, and also using this information to improve road safety and real-time traffic information. Okay, entering more in detail about the synergies of this architecture, of the national access point. One of the major work we are currently doing to around the data gathered by the NAP is a national Italian national project concerning MaaS that is called MaaS for Italy. The original idea of this project, founded by European Commission with the Next Generation EU funds, is to basically improve the current handshake among the different actors working under the MaaS system. I'm referring to MaaS operators and mobility operators. Currently, it requires technical integration, but also a lot of exchange of information and agreement among all the different stakeholders. Roughly, the idea of this MaaS for Italy project, of course, is to fund local pilot of MaaS, but having few pillars to be respected in a so-called MaaS for Italy national architecture. The former is to use mandatory the NAP data, gathered data, also for these use cases. And the second is to use a data sharing service repository facility that is a platform to to coordinate the data exchange and the information exchange between all the actors involved. Basically, the idea is the implemented part, because this is already been implemented, is to have an exchange between national access point MMTIS and this DS and SRM platform using transmodal ecosystem standards, and in particular NeTEx, Siri, and Opera for those relevant key process indicators calculation. Okay. But the other face of the coin is what's going on at local level. I mentioned that at national level, it has been chosen to be very strictly related using European standard with the national profiles. At the local level, of course, there is a higher level of freedom. But as I mentioned before, maintaining the compatibility with standards, European standards, in particular transmodal. As far as MaaS is concerned, you know that this kind of system has several levels of integration, starting from the information integration. So to be able to perform a journey planner, for example, having the information to calculate the journey planners. The second is an integration for booking and payment, and the third and the fourth increments the level of integration, having higher level of data and integration for a complete service offer for a certain territory. And the last is the top in the top level, having also the chance to also facilitate, some journeys respect others according to the social goals and political goals, the policy determined goals. On the right of these slides, I put the picture. I take this from the white paper of MaaS Alliance, just to give you roughly an idea of the number of standards, industrial and the EUR standards already implemented around these kind of systems. And so, as you can imagine, it is very complicated also to have a governance of this, having several system integrator, having several PTOs, having several MaaS operators, having MaaS integration, and so forth. So of course, this have to be respected, to be analyzed, and the idea is okay. At local level, you can use in the pilot what you retain to be good for your pilot, for your local pilot, but all these choices must be taken have to be taken into account the compliance with the transmodal and with the Italian national architecture, national access point, and DS and SRM. Okay, I'm moving to the conclusion of my presentation. Just a couple of words about what we did in the definition of our NeTEx Italian profile for the level 4 called alternative modes. We take, of course, inspiration, and basically we perform a tailoring of NeTEx so-called part 5 alternative modes. And we simplified as much as possible that part in order to able to exchange information about network topologies, operative areas, sharing stations, taxi stations, recharging stations, even if it's now no more mandatory for MMTIS, but is now moved to RTTI. But we also take this into account for MaaS by sharing digital vending platforms and of course fair information for sharing. For the public transport, we have the level 3. Okay, so what we learn at the moment from all these activities, we think that the architecture we identified, the regional access point and national access point, and the handshake among these platforms work well at the moment to governance, to manage the high level of complexity, high level of actors involved. It seems to be also good in terms of scalability. Of course, the story will demonstrate this, but at the moment we are entering step by step several further regions, and we notice that the work, the architecture is scalable. In the definition of the architecture, in the definition of the profiles and all the activities, we try to approach with the so-called KISS principle. So to take as much as possible simple the approach. And okay, we also did some work concerning NeTEx 2, in particular in terms of coordination of what have been done in using that protocol. My last slide is just to highlight that we didn't do this alone, but we work strongly with our colleagues abroad. In particular, we participate with the Italian Ministry in the Data4PT European project. We are currently working on NAP core, that is very, very important for this kind of activities. And last but not least, a smaller European project in Interreg called Linking Alps, where we had the chance also to implement another standard called Open Journey Planner. If you have any question, thank you for your attention and for your patience.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I see a couple of applauses, silent clapping. That's great. I just have one question. Have you been approached in Italy from any of those on-demand mode providers? And what standards are you proposing them to use? Are you enforcing the SEN standard, or are you open for other formats as it is allowed in the revised text of the NeTEx? What are your policy, if you have one?
Yes, we are not a policy, but we started to discuss with the PTOs for this kind of services, on-demand services, and basically we agreed to have the information about the on-demand service the day before, if possible. And in this way, basically, from the technical point of view, we notice that the NeTEx profile is currently is currently sufficient to exchange also this kind of information about on-demand public transport service. If the service is done on the fly, I mean with a short with short advice. This is a different approach, and currently we didn't tackle these in detail.
Okay, Pauline, you have raised your hand.
Yes, thank you, Soren. So on that last question, I'm Pauline. I work for Void Technology, an e-scooter company, and we have developed the NeTEx format in December. And we've tried to reach the Italian national access point. I think it was in January, Fabrizio. We haven't received an answer yet. So I was wondering, should we reach out directly to the reps instead?
I miss exactly your question. You wrote to the Italian ministry to have the URL or something different?
Yes, correct. I think we wrote to the Ministry of Transport, and then we wrote to the National Access Point contact email as well.
Okay. I don't know why. Anyway, this is of course a public URL, and I can provide in the chat for
Super.
you, and it is also published in the. There is an official document, a table, basically a quite simple table in a European portal. But I can provide you shortly, no problem.
Super, that'd be lovely. Maybe I didn't find it. Thank you.
And you can download you can download the NeTEx datasets from there, but also there are a couple of APIs for GraphQL download of data if you prefer.
Okay, we want to upload our data on the portal.
Okay, good.
So yeah, and I think that's maybe the new element here is that until now, NeTEx and Siri has very much been a discussion with public transport operator, but with the on-demand, we'll see a whole new breed of operators coming into play, namely the on-demand operators like Voi and who else is operating. And I think the interesting and the new take is that an operator like Voi is operating in several countries, whereas public transport, for practical reasons, only operating in one country. Therefore, you, Pauline, you can easily be subjected to various interpretation of standards, and that's really what we're trying to avoid, I guess. So with that, I think we have to move on. And Fabrizio, you have to leave. So thank you for your efforts in Italy to make the open standards available, and we look forward to see that also Voi can be included together with all your colleagues in the business. And best of the future to Italy. Have a good day,
Thank you very
Fabrizio.
much. Thank you very much.
And we will move on to the next point, which is looking into more into NeTEx Part 5 and Siri for on-demand modes. And that's the as part of this revised regulation, there's been work going on making a SEN standard for NeTEx Part 5 and Siri. And if you have happened to download that manual, it's a 500-page thing. So there's at least been a lot of writing involved. So now I just would like to have some words around it. Why should I read it? Why should I use it? So for that, Tuto Tai from IT for PT has taken the challenge to try to talk us into NeTEx Part 5. So Tuto, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Soren. And full disclosure, I haven't read the 500 pages except to correct typos, and I discourage anyone to want to do that. It's not how you should do. It's the same as saying you should open a dictionary to learn a language and read it from the first to the last page. It is not the efficient way. So let's dive a little bit into NeTEx Part 5 and Siri. So very quickly, my presentation, well, I'll give a little bit of introduction, but originally I wanted also to take us a step back on some definitions and models before diving really much into what the standards encompass, and then hopefully we'll have enough time for questions. So first, I'm Tuto. For the one who do not know me yet, I'm a project manager and expert contributor within IT4PT. I'm based in France. And actually, if you have crossed my path at some conferences, it's mostly because I really think that technology is not the end. It's only a mean to build communities, build bridges, make sure that we can actually work together for a better sustainable environment for us all. So very much into the spirit of the Green Deal. You have my contact details on the screen if you need them. And you can also drop me in a mail, a call in any of these languages. But for the sake of this presentation, let's keep it in English. IT4PT, who we are a non-profit organization, and originally we come from conventional public transport, so very much buses, trains, trams, and so on, where we enable open architecture, data accessibility, and interoperability based on standards that are derivated from SEN standards and also best practices in how we use them. We are actually quite known for our IT4PT specifications for onboard units, all the wiring, all the things you don't want to know when you open the roof of a bus or a tram and you see all these cables running around. We are a membership-based organization with over 160 members who are spread in 28 countries across most continents, and they regroup public transport authorities, operators, associations, consultants, industry representatives, vehicle manufacturers, OEMs, you name them. They are all helping us to build this open architecture for interoperability. They are the ones who are the foundation of our community for innovation. And we are also open to partners, associations, and so on. And all of that together, what we also do on top of producing standards and best practices and engaging with our community, we also have a label for compliance, making sure that the standards are rightfully interpreted, implemented, but also because it's important, especially when you talk about hardware and onboard units, when a public transport authority buy a bus, an onboard unit that claims to use our specification, they actually have a seal of approval saying that this onboard unit, this cable, the machinery fits the standards. So that's actually quite important for us. So enough about who we are. Let's take a step back on this global topic of standards and data sharing for on-demand services. And actually, this part of the slides was inspired by Soren, because I wanted to clarify what we are talking about today. I've heard a lot throughout the communication, throughout the different conversations we had. Are we talking here about demand responsive transit? Are we talking about on-demand services? Are we talking about new modes? Are they all about public transport or not? This is what Transmodal believes public transport is. This is what you will find in our data reference model. So everything in green on that slide is what we consider being public transport. And the main thing you need to actually remember is public transport is an advertised transport service and available for the use by the public, though it could be under some restrictions. It does not define by definition what kind of vehicle is used, what kind of travel mean. That is a second layer that you will have at the bottom of this slide. And what we mean by conditions for access is, for example, you would imagine that if it's a car sharing, yes, anyone can use it. Yes, it's publicly advertised, but condition might require that you actually have a driving license, and you usually cannot fit more than 3 people or 4 in a car that you share. So that's very much a distinction we make between what is public transport and what is not public transport, the part that you have in gray. For today's discussion, we will focus mostly actually on the left side of that green part, though the on-demand that I've circled in orange on the right side, this one for us is demand responsive transit that is very close to conventional public transport. So that would be your on-demand shuttle, for example, or a bus that you can flag in a certain area, in a certain street. Those are so close to conventional public transport that usually it does not generate so many problems for expressing the service offer in NeTEx and series. So very much today we will be focusing on, again, the alternative mode of operation, so vehicle sharing, vehicle rental, and vehicle pooling that is covered by NeTEx Part 5 and also for Siri for the real-time information. Now, again, another step back that I like using is also to showcase, and I guess Pauline and a lot of operators will know that in the room, everything is linked. National access point and us travelers, let's say we're only one part of these different layers of public transport. If we take it from the bottom up, it always starts with the vehicle, with how they share data between themselves, how their onboard units are interconnected, actually how they are managed by fleet manager, and so on. That for some cases, they will have to discuss in a certain way with the existing infrastructure. So for example, we have seen out in the streets, traffic light priority for buses or first responders vehicles and so on. And in the case of, let's say, shared scooters or shared bikes, you actually do have systems that where the vehicle needs to talk with the infrastructure if you want to, for example, use a docking station. So all of that would be the bottom layer of fleet management. On top of that, then you have the back office, is usually where fleets are managed, data is exchanged between the vehicle, the public transport operator, and the agency for management of services. These can be done in several standards or specification, depending actually on what's your specific type of service. And then from these back office, then you can feed national access point or directly the customers via an app, via MaaS application, via MaaS solutions, and so on. So it's really to show you, and I have it in a simplified domain, that you can't just take national access point in one corner. You can't just take mandates for open data between a public transport operator and its authority without forgetting that everything is linked, and everything will create requirements for data to be standardized, machine readable, and actually exchangeable in ways that people can understand each other even before they reach the mandate of MMTIS delegated regulation and transformed into open data or shared for trip planning application. Supporting this idea of having several layers to public transport and how public transport is managed, that is actually why originally the entire ecosystem of SAN standards were created, because it's, as you can see on the previous slides, not just passenger information. So in that context, we have transmodal, which is our reference data model. So our dictionary that you should not read from the first to the last page, but where you can look for an exact definition of a certain concept. So for example, what is a fair product, or what is a vehicle, what is how are dates defined, for example, and it also goes with a certain architecture between the concept. So for example, if you describe a vehicle, then you can enter into a deck plan and then seating arrangement or space for vehicles on board, for example. Based on transmodal as a data model, there were three main standards that were defined when it comes to managing a service, managing a public transport service and offer. NeTEx, that is for everything that is known in advance, so planned. It can also be planned work in the sense that you know it before, so it's schedule information or static information. Then you have Siri for the dynamic information or real-time information, so everything that is happening at that exact moment and cannot be known in advance. And then Opera that Fabrizio mentioned, and he's the chair of that working group, that is for more stats, so comparing what has been realized with what was actually planned, so observed data that actually made it to the revised delegated regulation MMTS that Petra presented us before. So really to show you that NeTEx, Siri, and Opera were designed to go beyond passenger information in the sense that they will allow an operator to manage their fare, to define the way that their products are being built in terms of tarification, but also manage the fleet and discuss with the infrastructure. So you can see here on this slide that have appeared that usually when you talk about mobility as a service and you want to build it, you need the first 3 layers. Obviously, you need passenger information. That's the part that we all know as users, as travelers. But you also need fare management to make sure that whatever is reflected in the MaaS solution has the right price, the right offer to it. So it would facilitate the booking. And you also have the 3rd layer, which is managing the mobility services. So making sure that the vehicle that the user see is the one that is actually the one in capacity to be offered, to run, or simply to be rented. And because we have our friends of mobility data and GBFS in the room, I also wanted to reinforce the fact that there is no standard or specification war, and they all reply to a specific use case. And you can see in pink or purple on the slide where GBFS plays and is important, because that would be the one that would facilitate trip planning and passenger information, whereas NeTEx and Siri and Opera would be used much more, let's say, on the coordination of operations, fleet management, and exposure. That would make sure that the data is solid before you can actually make the last layer of MaaS, which is make it visible for trip planning and the users. Now, talking a little bit about NeTEx, as I said, it's huge. It's Soren said 500 pages. I'm pretty sure it's a little bit more, but because it has different role, because it was built in different parts. So it's where it is very important to see that NeTEx, because it's not just passenger information, it was really built also to support a unified, standardized language for people to actually create and manage public transport services. So in part 1, you have the public transport network topology. Part 2, everything that is needed to create schedule, timetable, to actually make your roster of vehicles, drivers, and anything you need to operate your system. And part 3, very much the fare information. So depending on your role in your organization, depending on your lens, then you would dig into one of these parts. And then part 4, 5, and 6 are actually subset because they are profiles of NeTEx. So a profile is very much just a limited view on everything that NeTEx has to reply to specific use cases. So you have part 4 that Fabrizio mentioned, that is the European Passenger Information Profile. So I guess it would be for conventional public transport, the closest to GTFS schedule, for example. You have part 5 that is for all alternative modes, so vehicle sharing, vehicle pooling, and vehicle rental. That will interest us here. And you have part 6 that is very much for accessibility description. So does the train station has revolving doors? Can I access it in a wheelchair? Does it have guiding strips on the station? And so on. Siri was also built same as NeTEx with different lens based on actually what interests you, what you actually need to make your system work. So Siri is built on concrete services for real-time information, going from estimated timetable to vehicle monitoring to situation exchange to facility monitoring. So all of that will indicate to you which part you should look at. And in orange here are all the parts of Siri that could be used for vehicle sharing, vehicle rental, vehicle pooling, depending actually on which type of information you need. Is it the location of the vehicle, or is it to tell people that a station, for example, is broken and you can't use it to dock any bikes and so on. Now, after all these droning concepts and definitions that I believe are quite important to know when you want to dig into how all of this is used, some use cases for NeTEx and Siri. And here I have presented to you use cases that currently within the French standardization group, that is the mirror of SEN working group for transmodal NeTEx and Siri, that I have the chance to chair, we are discussing for vehicle sharing, vehicle rental, and vehicle pooling. So all the things that all of us around the table, we said, okay, GBFS for trip planning, but how do we use NeTEx and Siri for all the rest to make our life easier when it comes to back office management and service management? First, use cases. You have a heterogeneous fleet. So people like Pauline, for example, at Voi, or some Tier or any other operator, they don't necessarily just have one type of scooter. They don't necessarily have just scooter. They can have scooters, bikes, and cars. They can have moped and bikes. They can have plenty of different types of vehicle. And where GBFS focusing on trip planning will allow them to very precisely describe what they can offer to the passenger, how can they, in their backbone, unify the management of a heterogeneous fleet? And also describe that based with this very different fleet with different vehicle, it has different pricing. So it's actually where NeTEx can be used to aggregate all these services in one feed that will remain on their server, on their database, making sure that they have a solid representation across all the different geographies that they operate in of different options in terms of type of vehicle, fare structure, and so on. And also if they manage parking, dynamic fare pricing for that, vehicle position and vehicle status. So that's one use case. Another use case we have is, what if I have a station, I manage a station, and it's filled with a lot of other modes. Let's say it's a mid-size train station that also has bus stops, that also has light rail, that also have docking stations for bikes, that has in one corner all the free floating scooters, and then on another side, all the car available for rental. If I'm the station manager, I would prefer to have one format to represent all these different level of services that are offered within my station in different actually physical places to make sure that, I don't know, bus don't enter trains and so on, but also to differentiate which one is accessible or not, because it does make a difference when you're trying to guide your travelers and users through different multimodal options. And that's where Siri and NeTEx, with its umbrella of describing a site where you can have several different boarding platforms, quays or stop place and so on would come in handy. And also where you can detail the accessibility information for each level, for example, or each boarding platform, each quay, and so on. And with Siri, you will have kind of like that dynamic information for what you have just described. Last slide, the use case of carpooling. So in France, we love carpooling. Like, I think everywhere I go, I'm like, ah, yeah, you French carpooling, yeah, so hard. We never understand what you do with that because we have tons of options. And the government pays for it, so it's perfect. But all these options, we have inline carpooling that is actually very close to on-demand conventional public transport, meaning that it's one line that goes, for example, from an industry zone to the city hall to the public park. But it's still carpooling because the vehicle belongs to a private individual, but they subscribe their services on an app. So which one is it? Is it full-on shared mobility with with Voy and Share, or is it like more closer to demand responsive transit, like solutions created by some public transport authorities? We're not sure. Good thing is, if at least NeTEx would be an umbrella for them to not have to decide who they want to be closest with. We also have instant carpooling, so where you will have on an app immediately just, oh, there is a carpooling option just next to me. And based on that, you need to make sure you have a very strong way to reconstruct schedule and itinerary based on only real-time information, which is actually the first classic use case for Siri adoption in Europe for public transport, conventional public transport. It was why Siri was used by the UK for the last 10 years, actually, to describe their bus services. And we have another carpooling case where it's actually fully managed by a public transport authority, where they decide that carpooling is better than running empty buses or shuttles. And in that case, because they also run buses or metros or tram, well, they'd rather use a unified way again for the description of their network, for their fare product, and for their management of services. That would be it for the presentation. So if you have any questions, any comments, any input, I can also hear people disagreeing with me. I'm also open to that.
And you have some applauses coming up. Good.
Yeah.
Any questions? Or was it absolutely comprehensive? I think what I'm taking away is that the emphasis is on that it's integrated as part of a bigger scheme. That each modality is not alone; it's part of a bigger scheme, and hence also has to be that digitally. But we'll see if we can challenge that. And to challenge that, we actually have Isabelle de Robert from Mobility Data. And Isabelle, you are with us from far away, I think. And it's kind of morning your place. But you're involved in the GBFS specification, and would like to have your take on why should we in Europe? We are very much a Europe-based community. Why should we adopt GBFS? What will it do for us? So the floor is yours, Isabelle. And when you're done, we can all go and have coffee. So no rush.
Thank you, Soren. Are we looking good on time?
Yeah, we are looking good. It might be get a few minutes less for coffee. Let's see
Okay.
how you can do it.
Sounds good. So I'm joining from Montreal. It's 9:30 right now, but my colleague Fabien is in the room today, and he's based in France. Hi, Fabien. Do you see my slide? It's the first time I do this with Teams. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So thank you. So I'm Isabelle de Robert. I'm the director of product at Mobility Data. I'm currently in Montreal, but I'm actually relocating to Barcelona in 1 month exactly. And I have a background in engineering, data science. I speak French and English, and I'm going to be presenting mobility data and GBFS more specifically. So the general bike share fleet specification was designed to standardize the way systems communicate with trip planning applications. It was created initially by someone called Mitch Vars. It has other use cases than trip plannings. It's used for dashboard analytics. One thing to mention is that it's designed to be traveler-centric. So we want to represent everything that is going to be displayed to riders. So created by Mitch, then it was adopted by NAPSA, the North American Bike Share Association. Then NAPSA chose mobility data to govern and improve this specification. And more recently, we became the official maintainer of GBFS. So who is Mobility Data? We're a nonprofit organization. We develop open source data formats that provide traveler information. Our HQ is in Canada, in Montreal, more specifically. We have 120 plus members across the world, about 20 employees. And our mission is better transportation through data. So more specifically, we steward open source specification, GBFS, but also GTFS, which has a schedule and a real-time branch. And we also develop free open source tools, documentation, to ensure that the data is produced high quality, consistently through every step. We also advocate for data standardization, interoperability, data quality sharing. And I want to second what Yuto said earlier. Our organizations collaborate on making all these standards work together smoothly. A map of where our membership is located. And back to GBFS. So it has 6 core areas: the systems, the stations, so where they are, how many docks are available, the vehicles, travel rules, zones, pricing information, and alerts. And there are 4 modes that we can model with GBFS: bikes, scooters, mopeds, and car sharing. And we can also represent systems that have all of these modes in the same fleet. What about other on-demand modes? I know it's on the topic today, so dial-a-ride, taxi, shuttle buses. So I also added a quick slide about that. These modes are represented currently in GTFS extension projects. So there are 3 on the screen here: GTFS Flex, that is planned to be adopted in GTFS in the next few weeks. And there is also GTFS On Demand, another branch of GTFS that was created by a working group a few years ago. And then Transit App created something called GOFS Lite. GOFS was the former name of GTFS On Demand. And so it's an offshoot of GTFS On Demand, a bit simpler, lightweight, and it has more on-demand functionalities. And currently, I think Transit App uses both GOFS Lite and GTFS Flex. Back to GBFS again. So it's a real-time pool-based data specification. It can share what the current status is of a mobility system. It's a collection of JSON files. And all the details are available in the gbfs.org website that has all of the technical documentation resources available. There are a collection of open source tools to support GBFS. Some are maintained by us, some are maintained by the community. So we have an official validator that was donated by Fluxio. Sebastian, I think you're in the room. Thank you. We also have a dataset catalog that lists all of the public and maintained GBFS datasets we can find. JSON schema, there's a collection of online visualizers. We also maintain a feed contact email tracker and more. GBFS is currently used in more than 900 systems, 40 countries, 700 cities. I added a link to the dataset catalog. I think we're going to share the slides after. So a note about how GBFS is governed. Anyone can suggest a modification or an extension to the specification. Anyone can open a vote. And anyone can vote as a return or veto the process. Every proposal can become part of a release candidate if the vote passes. And the requirements for the vote to pass is that we need to have at least 3 positive votes and have at least 1 producer and 1 consumer, and additionally, no veto. Then when this is passed, it goes into the release candidate stage. And then in order to have a release candidate officially adopted, each change must be implemented by at least 1 producer and 1 consumer. So currently we have the GBFS v3 in a release candidate stage, and Fabien here is working on having it officially adopted. So the guiding principle of GBFS are simplicity and ease of data production. A note on compatibility with other standards. I know it's the topic today. So there is the MDS that you probably know of already. MDS requires to have a public GBFS dataset published, and it's a specification that has a different scope than GBFS. It's intended for mobility providers and the public agencies that manage them. There is also TOMP API that was designed to work with GBFS. So it's intended to connect the operators to different MaaS application, a booking API. And NeTEx Siri is fully interoperable with GBFS up to 2.2 at least, because up to 2.2 we have done some mapping work in collaboration with IT4PT, and I know that interoperable and compatibility can be broad definitions. So specifically what it means for us is that each GBFS element up to 2.2 can map to a single NeTEx or Siri element, and there's only one NeTEx Siri element that maps to 2 GBFS elements. So in our view, it's interoperable. However, the newer GBFS versions 2.3 and 3.0 release candidates have new fields, and they are just not yet represented in NeTEx and Siri. A little bit about what's next for GBFS. In the short term, we have using the user location to select feeds to display, and also adding future availability for car sharing in particular. And some spec polishing as usual. And then in the longer term, we also are looking at limiting publishers' server loads from requests and reducing the response size. That's pretty much all I have. I think we have time for questions, but that's just a recap. GBFS is traveler-centric, 900 systems across the world. The modes are bike, scooter, moped, car sharing. And in our view, it's interoperable with MDS, Tomp API, and NeTEx Siri. And I think we have time for questions.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for this.
My pleasure.
Any questions?
I see that we had comments in the chat.
Yeah, we had, but there was stuff from Edwin. He just want to make a commercial that the Tomp API works for basically anything that's digital.
Yeah. That's a good clarification.
Is that fair, Edwin? Yeah.
Yeah, but to be honest, the Tomp API was built at first hand on the GBFS, so there's not short of truth in it. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Any other questions? Because I think
I guess it's more comments, but I would love to see which fields you could not find in NeTEx and Siri, because since Søren kept on saying that it's 500 pages, I'm pretty sure that it was one of the last ones that were not read.
Yeah, they might be in a form that we haven't seen yet in the documentation. Yeah. They might be in working mode. So it's more.
They're always hiding somewhere, probably page, let's say 360 something.
Yeah, we need to have some AI on this one, apparently.
Probably.
Okay, so what should yeah, I really don't know how to make questions out of this because in reality it seems like we have two standards. We have one that is kind of regulated, that is mandated, and we have one voluntary standard. And the voluntary standard claims that it's fully compatible as it should based on the new regulation. So in that respect, we should be good. So I think now maybe the best thing was to have some coffee now and then come back and then put the question to the NAPCOR people to figure out what is the guidance to the to people who contact a NAP entity to say, okay, I want to share my data, and what should be on the shopping list? Should they say we only want send data, or we want send data, but if you can provide other modes, other data, please do that, but also with a converter, and that basically also says, well, maybe. Now I have a question. The regulation says that there has to be a converter. Do you see this as your task to provide such a converter to NeTEx from the GBFS?
So that's a topic of collaboration between mobility data and IT4PT. And that's something we would love to have more clarity on from NAPCOR directly on what is the definition of compatibility and interoperable. Is it one single item is it a one-on-one relationship between all the elements? Is it that it can be converted automatically without any human intervention? Or if it's a process to convert where you can do some automatic conversion and then you also have some human intervention, is it working or not? We would love to have more clarity on that, and then any converters between GBFS and other standards could definitely be a joint project for the organizations that work on them. But we would love more clarity. I don't know if Tuto, you're aligned or...
I can remember what Peter said. I see it from a legal point of view. It's it's the one who's coming with some data that's not sent. But the interesting part here is how does that work in the real world?
Yeah.
And I guess some kind of collaboration would be helpful.
So
yeah,
we do have a documentation that maps all of the elements between the two standards. That's one. It's not an automated converter, but it's a resource. Tuto, do you want to add to that?
Yes, and I guess when we first worked on the mapping, it was a first step forward because we knew that the revised delegated regulation would come up. So we decided that it's better if the people who are maintaining the standards, who actually know it like their backhand, would define how each field should be interpreted and if they can be fully mapped to one another or not. With the hope that it would lead us to some open source tools for conversion and support. However, I guess on both sides, and any standard is the same, the people who write the standards, the experts, they have their vision on it, they have their interpretation, but a lot of times what you see out in different organizations is they have a different interpretation, even if it's like clearly documented in English. And I remember having also that discussion with GTFS and with people just using GTFS, they were like, yes, it's written, but I understand this word differently, or I understand a modal verb differently, and then the feeds can't be used by any other third party because it creates that loop of non-interoperability. So I guess it's still to be solved, but we definitely are very much welcoming the good relationship between the two organizations to try and bring our expertise into it.
Okay. And
Brede?
Brede, I think you were in with a hand.
Yeah, I had a hand, but Tuto said most of it. So
That's collaboration right
there. Do we need converters for this in the future? Maybe not.
Yeah.
Okay. Definitely, the challenge will be if neighboring countries decide differently on this subject on a NAP level. But that we will learn more about after the break, and the time is now. So we are 8 minutes. Could we start again at 4? Would that be okay with you guys?
Yep.
So we are back here at 4, and I'm quite sure that there are a fresh brew of coffee to you just outside of your room. So feel free and enjoy your break, and we will be back here at 4 p.m. Central East Time. European time. Yeah.
Thank you.
See you.
Talk later.
We are getting close to 4 o'clock. Just need to something. So we're back and ready for the final. So for the next half an hour approximately, we will look into the NAP perspective, since we have 27 EU countries and a couple of others who have decided to go the NAP way. And how should what is the perspective and what is the guidelines from NAPCOR to its members? How should they deal with this new form of modality? Now you have some modes that comes in that kind of, some of them might even have 10, 20 countries that they operate in. And how many different standards will they be met with from the NAPs? That's my question to you guys. So I'll leave it with Timo Hoffmann from the head of NAPCOR, and he is helped by Katarina Helfert from Austriatech and David Arino Montoya from IT for PT. So Timo, will you open the floor?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Søren.
Maybe with the sound on?
Oh, I hope.
Oh, it's me.
Yeah, I hope that everyone can hear me.
Yep, I hear you.
Okay,
Sorry.
wonderful. Otherwise, you would have an issue with interoperability. All right, so thanks for inviting us as NAPCOR. My name is Timo Hoffmann. I am the General Secretary of NAPCOR. I'm supported by some of my colleagues from NAPCOR who are much better experts on the topic of MaaS than I am. So I'm happy to have them. And yes, maybe on the next slide, I can start with a little bit of an overview. I'll try to keep it very short. NAPCOR stands for National Access Point Coordination Organization for Europe. And we call ourselves organization since we do foresee this as an ongoing activity that will likely, and that's the plan, live on as long as there are NAPs in Europe. So well beyond the time frame of the current funded project, which is running until 24, when we'll look into, or we are already actively looking into prolongment and follow-up activities in that regard. So it's supposed to be a long-living activity, and as far as we have had our discussions with our steering committee, which consists of all the member states and some other organizations, and with the Commission in all those discussions, no one said, okay, let's cease our activity. So that's just a short intro on that. We have a focus on structural topics like the mechanisms on how to improve interoperability of the NAP and interoperability of the mobility-related data, and then the standard harmonization, the alignment and harmonization of the procedures. That was our focus, or is our focus. And as you know, the NAPs are pretty much focused on data provision as their only service, and not really other services. And this is where MaaS, for example, comes in. So this is where we usually draw the line at the NAP level. Of course, the delegated regulations, as they are part of the ITS directive and are the foundation of the NAPs, where the NAPs are coming from, and the mandate for member states to create them, are always our most important foundation for NAPCOR, including MTIS. On the next slide, you can see our organizational structure. It's we don't need to go through it. Maybe just as an important information. that we do have a pretty strong focus on linking activities in the various working groups. We have a core alignment team with the leads of each of the working groups for coordinating and aligning within ourselves. And of course, we have our steering committee, which, as I said, consists of all the member states or representatives from all the member states. Yes, so this is basically how we operate. One focus or wish also from the Commission, but also in our own interest, was it to take a specific look into some specific data categories, something that is not really reflected in our structure, and so this is, and here are some examples like cycling, SRTI, MaaS, alternative fuels. So some of the data categories in the delegated regulations. For those, we have tried various activities. We have some action groups defined that work on those, or we have set up some ambassador teams. And this is where a little bit the expertise comes in. And I'm happy to have Katarina here, I hope.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yes, wonderful. And then I will hand right over to her and let the experts talk. So thanks.
Thank you very much. Then I will take over because I'm talking today a little bit on behalf of the MaaS ambassadors within NAPCOR. Some of you might hurt me because I have been now I mean, it's some kind of a standard member of all NOMAD activities in the last half year, which is great that there is happening so much overlapping. As Timo said, what we have seen in NAPCOR right from the beginning, we had really these focus on, as we had the working groups with the different content, and especially when it comes to the topic of MaaS, we see that the different topics related to multimodal activity or to MaaS related to MaaS services were spread over these different working groups. And on the one hand, the NAPCOR project itself has some kind of alignment activities overall, but nevertheless, there has been seen the need also by the European Commission that some specific topics needs, I would say, more focus, where we see really the need to have specific cross-cutting activities and even more aligning over the topic of data, but having the whole topic sometime in the focus, although NAPCOR is really coming from the focus on the NAPS and the data focus. So as said, one of these activities was really to establish a small group of persons for the different topics. And for my part, it was the MaaS ambassadors. And what we are now doing, we try to keep up a little bit with the different activities in the NAPCOR working groups and try to collect information from the working groups, bring them together so we have a regular comprehensive overview what is happening within NAPCOR that is might relevant for the topic at MaaS at all, and the development of MaaS and the role of the NAPS within MaaS. We try to coordinate a little bit this internal information and really, on the other hand, also raise awareness for these coming from a cross-cutting topic expertise within the working groups, because you all know that we're working on a topic and working on the data, and somehow you don't see it maybe from the perspective of the topic itself, and that's what we're trying to do also with our active involvement in some of the working groups. And we also act as kind of an external contact point for questions related to this matter or for specific activities also with external NAPCOR is doing. And yeah, for the awareness raising topic, I think it's also important because sometimes it's not realized that we have such a potential from the project in regard of the topic. So next slide, please. When I'm talking really about a small group, this is really a small group. So at the moment we are 3, sometimes 4 people that trying to keep up a little bit with the activities within all the NAPCO group. More or less the main coordinator from our point of view is Melissa Blanc from Belgian Federal Public Service Mobility and Transport Department. It's Klaas Roberg from Trafikverkeer in Sweden. We are supported by David Schoenmakers, also from the Belgian Federal Public Service Mobility and Transport, and myself from Austria Tech side. Next slide, please. Yeah, perfect. And what we are concrete doing besides collecting information inside and reporting is what we're trying to do is within the context of NAPCOR also to align a little bit with activities of other initiatives. So in the past year, there were some exchanging activities on the one hand with platforms like the MaaS Alliance, for instance, with several important stakeholders also from the MaaS community. There has been established also the contacts with the rail sector. There was an extensive exchange between that. And we also try to set up this more strategic within NAPCOR to have specific sessions to look over our own focus somehow. And so there were specific MaaS sessions in the Mobility Data Days 2022 and 2023, where we also collected some information and inputs, especially from the MaaS community, that will be used for the future activities. And also for this year, 2024, and maybe following up, as Timo said, this will not stop. We have planned some additional activities, on the one hand, internal within NAPCOR, but also with external events. And we are always happy to keep in touch with those of you who would like to exchange a little bit on the topic, or maybe would like to see what is going on in NAPCOR. So next slide, please. So a little shout out. If you have any additional questions and would you like to contact with us, for sure, Timo as NAP coordinator is always there for you. But we are especially interested to get in touch with you or to have maybe some more specific exchange and maybe discuss also on what you can maybe make use of what is produced in a NAPCOR. So this is the point I would like to hand over to my colleague David, who will give you an insight on what NAPCOR is also working and which might be also of interest with this group here in the future. So thank you from my side.
Thank you, Katharina. So now going from the general to the something specific, this is an activity that we are is taking place at the moment in the subworking group 4.3, which is multimodal standards. And it's a guidance document for member states in the use of booking APIs with multimodal standards in the context of NAPs. This is a guidance. It collects recommendations on the topic of booking APIs. And what we are doing in this document is to analyze the role of the NAPs. As you might know, there are different types of NAPs. Some of them, they are only metadata registry. Others, they have metadata as well as datasets. And these types of NAPs, they require different strategies when regarding the booking APIs. And the 3 APIs that we study in this document are BOB, for one used for public transport. At the moment, OSDM, more known in the rail sector, and TOMP API, as you for sure you know, in alternative modes mainly. We had a series of meetings in our working group, and we collected the vision and insights of the different member states of how they see the architecture of the NAPs and the booking APIs, the interfaces and the connections between them. And this was very great insight to understand how booking the countries, they see the use of booking APIs with the data or the information that is collected in the NAPs and how it can be implemented in the MaaS ecosystem in the different countries. The document, it will be at the moment in preparation, and it will be published in the second quarter, third quarter of 2024. It will be publicly available, and I hope we will share it with all of you as soon as it's available. Now, this is something that this is what we are doing at the moment, but now perhaps we also should look into the future, and that's why I would like to ask Timo to have a few words of what's still to come in NAPCOR.
Yes, thank you, David. So we have some items here as for our goals for the future. As I said, it's not only the this year, it's yeah, for the upcoming years. We will have a stronger and more concrete emphasis on the multimodal aspects. Many NAPs have a legacy coming from the road traffic sector. So we are slowly building up yeah, expertise in that regard. There's still a long way to go, I think. One way of doing is to put a much stronger focus on multimodal aspects in our future activities. And for that, we also want to involve more representatives from the authorities that are currently not really represented in the actual project. That means particularly public transport authorities. How we'll do that, that's still a little bit up for discussion, and we'll see. But that's at least the goal, to have a little bit better, yeah, representation also on that aspect, which even on the ministry, member state level is often in different departments and so on. And so we need to work on that a bit more. Set dedicated activities within NAPCOR actors on mobility as service. So this will become part of our working program in the years forward, I'm quite sure. And I think the input for, okay, what are the things that we should work on as NAPCOR comes from events like this, channeled and prioritized maybe a little bit via our ambassador team. That's a little bit how we work. And 3 more points I want to mention that came to my mind that we didn't put down here, but I think they are important. One is actually a result that NAPCOR already has and has published, which is Mobility DCAT AP, which is a metadata catalog for mobility data platforms, and not only national access points. Actually, since there was no metadata catalog for mobility data platforms before, not international ones at least, this is something we have been working on. And so if there's also in the industry data platforms from the industry or from any other body, please do take a look at Mobility DCAT IP, because that is something that we will very likely focus on the national access points to get interoperability on the metadata level, which is quite important as a one step towards interoperability. So that's one thing I did want to mention. And another thing is, yeah, in the first half of the event, there was already mentioned a little bit that it's quite important to speak the same language. And also, if you read the delegated regulations, you interpret it differently than I do or a third party does. So we recognize that fact, and we are working on a data dictionary for the interpretation of the data categories that are listed in the delegated regulation, or delegated regulations, plural, and also on the MMTS delegated regulation. And on that part, we are still involved internally to put something out as a data dictionary, and we are still figuring out what the best way of interacting with the community for commenting or for additions and so on will be. As you know, or as you can imagine, that's quite a challenge to orchestrate this within the member states, and then also with the community, it's quite a challenge. But we'll take up the challenge, and again, we have started the work on, and hopefully we'll be able to publish something there as well. And lastly, the third and last thing now from my end is, there is one yearly event that we organize from NAPCOR, the NAPCOR Mobility Data Days, which last year happened in Budapest and in November. And this year it will happen in Italy, the city to be announced very soon. Also in November, at the beginning of November, and I know some of you have been there, and from the feedback we heard, it was quite good reviewed. We had 220 people from 28 countries, from also from Canada and from Japan, and more than half of the people were, or about half of the people were not from NAPCOR. So this is indeed an event where we try to interact with the stakeholder community of all sorts. So please mark your calendar, because I hope and think that multimodal topics will again be a strong topic in that event as well. Yeah, and as probably that's enough for now, and happy, or we are happy for any questions and for the discussion later on.
Maybe we can immediately answer Søren's question in the chat. Who is asking for, yes, there are no involvement representative from private modes nor agency now. I will only on one hand include the partners, and I'm sure Timo can give a little bit also an insight on the history, how the partners came together in NAPCOR. But in principle, what you see in the partners list are those who are involved in establishing and providing the national access points around Europe. But Timo, it's up to you to give a little bit history.
Yes, I can do so. So obviously our focus for the national access points, and the national access points are in the responsibility of the member states, and this was our focus. And as there are so this was our focus in setting up together a consortium to tackle the topic or the goals that NAPCOR has. Obviously, there's many communities that are super important for us as NAPS, because they are key data providers or data users. So they're the service providers, there's the road operators, there's the mobility providers, public transport representatives, and so on. There's a lot. But of course, we needed to keep the governance somewhat small. And I think also in the future, we will very much focus on member state representation in order to fulfill our goal of being the platform where the coordination of the member states in regards to how the NAPS will work, and how the mobility data standards used at the NAPS will work, and so on. So, and we feel like if we open up the governance of NAPCOR to a very large audience, including representatives from the private side or agencies, that will render our whole organization, at least at this stage, likely very hard to govern. And this is why we include those external stakeholders via our advisory board, which is now set up and also meets. The last time the advisory board met was actually at the Mobility Data Days in Budapest. And we felt like that was a good start. We know, though, that there is room for improvement on that, and we're looking on how to better do some community management or how we will interact with stakeholders. So there's of course room for improvement, and also happy to hear any suggestions on that end. Very likely, though, we won't open up NAPCOR to private organizations or public transport agencies, because there's quite a few in Europe around. So we need to somehow keep it manageable. Yeah, that's my lengthy answer. I hope it answered your question.
Well, now my microphone is working, and thanks for picking up my question. The reason is this, that you are in fact a contact point between public and private operators, and it seems like the public operators have an easier access to you guys than the private operators. That's my concern. And also, when I see a list of 4 MaaS ambassadors, and I do not see somebody who is actually dealing with MaaS on a daily basis, and if they are dealing with MaaS, then it's seen from a public perspective, not
Yes,
a private
definitely.
perspective.
Yeah,
and therefore the whole intention of the national access point is that they should provide data to public and private users alike. So it's the user point of view that I'm missing in your work.
Yeah, thanks for the comment. Maybe let me start with an answer, and maybe Katharina can add to that. I get your point. So the idea, what we had with the ambassadors, is that the ambassadors should be from our NAPCOR partners involved in the project to be able to coordinate the internal work in the various working groups. So this is how we set up the ambassadors. The ambassadors are not experts from other stakeholders from the outside. The NAPCOR ambassadors are meant to be the contact point from inside of NAPCOR, to be that contact point. Then from there on, the community management with the users can take place. This is how we thought of our ambassadors, and so this is why there's no, I don't know, a public transport agency a representative as an NAPCOR ambassador currently, for example. But Katharina.
Sure, yeah. That's also where I came in, because from Austria Tech side, more or less, other colleagues are involved who are more on the NAP side, and agree somehow. I see also that this concept was somehow made up during the go, so that they were just the starting point was okay. Somehow we are missing somehow to look from the topic side, and then okay, maybe ambassadors might be the next point. And so voluntarily we are doing some kind of additional work, let's put it like that, to make the first steps to have at least this better exchange, and to have at least somehow who is caring about the topics, who is maybe also will take care step by step with the users more and more, because this was established, I think, in summer last year. So this is something that is not for a long time, but has now been established for some months, and people somehow find them together. Søren, I absolutely agree with you. There should be even more like that. But I think you have to see this also as the first starting points, that from these very strict, we are the public NAPs, to see, okay, there is more, we have to consider more other views. This is the first step, and this is how I see it, as a starting point where we try to get more and more to interact at, and to do this on top of our activities that were planned in NAPCOR so far. I think this has also to be emphasized somehow, as this was original plans, and so we're doing some additional homework because we think it's necessary. So absolutely agree. Room for much improvement. However, I see this Timo as a first starting point to try to establish structures that will make it better, hopefully, for the future to Just not be only in a bubble, but open the bubbles up. So
Yeah,
that's
but
from
that was just my my point.
Yeah.
Other questions to the NAPCOR team? Don't know. Don't think there's more in the chat, is there?
There's one question. How is DCAT related to transmodel?
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I'm also not the DCAT AP expert here, but the idea behind Mobility DCAT AP is to be a metadata definition and description that makes it possible to describe data sets regardless of the format they are in. So any kind of format can be or should be able to be described with the Mobility DCAT AP metadata definition. So that any type of data can be listed at the NAP. This is basically the idea. So it's not specifically, as David said, related to transmodel nor any other standard. It's a metadata standard that is there to describe other content data. Okay, so I can see the discussion is going on, and I think they will fight it out and figure out what DCAT, how that works. Let them do that for a while. The other question is, how, for instance, now our dear friend from Voi and Tia and others that are operating in various EU countries, what will they be looking into when they come and say to Italy and to Norway and to Denmark and Germany, here is our open mobility data? Will they be able to give them in the same format throughout Europe, or are they forced into something national? How does that work? Because that's in reality how it works for the public transport data. You really have to know which country you're in and how they have decided the national profile for that particular country. And here in the Nordics, we're already seeing the issues between the Nordic countries, since there are different interpretations on the Nordic profile, the European minimum profile, and whatnot. Is that something that is going to carry on also for the shared modes? Is that how you see it, or have we learned from that experience? Can try to give an answer. Well, it indeed depends a little bit on the member states on how it is structured. I think very many NAPs are first of all happy to have data of any kind, to be blunt. So rather than no data, we, and now I speak for the German National Access Point, we are happy to include data regardless of what format it is on the first level. Then, of course, we are very much we do want to come towards some sort of interoperability, and ideally have also standardization on what standards to be used, and this is something that we are still in need, or there's still a need to for work on that. So we currently do not have a NAPCOR wide a recommendation exactly on what type of data is exactly or should be modeled directly, especially not in the mobility and the multimodal part. And I think this is something we are working on and will work on when we talk about the data dictionary, for example. That would be my first answer, but maybe Katarina and David, you can add to that.
No, I'm thinking about that, about your question. Indeed, NAPCOR, at the moment, we are working with the different national access points, and it's about the alignment harmonization between the national access points. There is no Europe is not at the moment a European umbrella access point, and at this we have to work and to keep working in the alignment and the coordination of the different member states through these documents, as Timo said, for example, the data dictionary and the other milestones that we have in NAPCOR.
Okay. Brede, you have a hand.
Yeah, so you are pointing to an important issue here, which we are going to fail on the public transport part in Europe with NeTEx, because it's not possible to use it from different national access points together in a cross-border system with different profiles today. So we should stop talking about the profiles, start to talk about plug and play NeTEx, and start to talk about the boring part, IDs, duplicates, harmonization of data, and make the data usable for a third party without extremely high cost of special integration for using data from national access point. And for the public transport part, we have come pretty far on that path. So I will talk a little bit about this in my presentation later for the mobility.
Okay. Should I take this as a segue over to you, Brede?
Maybe.
Thanks.
If it's
thanks to NAPCOR.
Thanks.
And
Thank you.
And Brede, let's hear from you and the what's cooking in Norway, and why you of all are going GBFS, which was kind of came as a surprise, since you're normally is a hardcore transmodal guy. So what revelation can you bring to us?
Yeah, I'll try to enlighten that.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Yeah. There. First of all, a little bit about myself. I'm a product owner at N2 in Norway, based in Oslo. And we think about the standardization as a tool. It's not a mean or an aim for us, but we need to use the standardization as a tool and use the best standardization for each purpose. And open source evangelist, and use a lot of time to build community and infrastructure for the future. And the governance about this, why are we doing this in Norway? It's because the government want us to have a national neutral chip runner, and they want the data to be shared openly. For that, we have the Ministry of Transport helping us, funding us. We have the Railway Directorate and two. We all build this initiative and solutions on the MMTIS regulation. So we use also that as a tool. It's not the purpose why we are doing it to have the check mark. We do this because we believe if you can do this the best way, you give maximum value to, back to the Norway society. And we have some tools also. The Railway Directorate publish handbooks. Why are we doing this in Norway? Which is part of the law from the Ministry of Transport. And the handbooks points to the profiles, which we maintain from N2. If you go to the micromobility, this hasn't been talked about today, but the cities and the municipalities, they need to regulate how the city room is used. How many bikes should be allowed in certain area? Where can you bike? Where can you park? Where is not allowed? They want to have some analytics on it. And for that, in Norway, they are using MDS, which Isabel talked about earlier today. And then the mobility operator operated in Norway already have GBFS. GBFS also have a lot of system availability. So for information part, that's the fastest way, and we think also that it's the best way in Norway to use this for public information. And to enlighten why I talk about GBFS here, because we have achieved so much with NeTEx for public transport, on-demand, flexible transport. The public transport authorities and operators in Norway, they have 4 responsibilities. 3 of them is in this slide. They have to update the national stop place registry that we have in Norway. If you don't have that in your country, start making one. It solves so many problems that you struggle with today. All of them send native NeTEx to us. So we said no to conversions, so there are no conversion from any format to NeTEx in Norway. Everyone is exporting native NeTEx on the Nordic profile to us. And we use Siri for the real-time updates. And for NeTEx, we only use part 1 and part 2 for information purposes. The 4th responsibility they have is to give us their prices and products, which also feed into a transport-based, NeTEx-based database. It is not on much light today. All this data is published in OpenShipliner. It's a free API, so everyone can use it. We have reached 1 billion responses per month for that. So the data is, we use the same data that we share. The same NeTEx data that we collect, we use, and we share it to third parties. We operate at the national access point in Norway. We convert the NeTEx data to GTFS and GTFS real-time on behalf of all stakeholders in Norway. So the different PTA, PTOs only have to focus on making correct NeTEx. And this has now given a huge outcome effects. The PTA, PTOs now are in a position to start to save money. They can rebuild their internal systems, data flows based on the high quality NeTEx data. And they can now start also to challenge different software providers. And they can collaborate on co-developing systems that they need, because we have standardized the base. So I am extremely in favor of NeTEx. But for micromobility, we have developed a mobility hub that collects GBFS. We have done this together with mobility data and the community around mobility data. We have seen the things that we needed that was not part of the GBFS. So we raised a question and got it part of the specification in a smooth way. So we collect GBFS now for e-scooters, city bikes, and shared cars. Collect all of them in one database. We share that as GBFS for third-party users. And we have a GraphQL API, which is easily showing each available vehicle on a map. We also feed the same GBFS that we share into OpenShipliner, which is part of the Triplan search and available to use in the same apps that use it for public transport. if we need NeTEx for this in the future, we think that it's better for us to convert or transfer the GBFS data to NeTEx and share it in the same way that we collect NeTEx for all stakeholders in Norway and convert it to GTFS and share it to international stakeholders or third-party users also in Norway. GTFS has some good use cases also inside of Norway. And back to this, from a transportable perspective, we could have done this with NeTEx and Siri, but why didn't we? There were no software support for it. We introduced a much higher complexity, and we saw that it wasn't giving us any added value of that we needed. There was no libraries available, and that is still a situation. And without libraries, each of us need to do this their own way. And if we do that our own way, we have the problem that we have talked about just a few minutes ago. And if you see at the regulation part of it, that's out of the scope of NeTEx and Siri. So the cities in Norway will still continue to use MDS. And by using that, the operators need to have GBFS. And then they only force the operators to have money flying out of the window. That's how we think about this in Norway. I have a mobility map demo. This is from our production. Shows all available vehicles live in a map. This is from also center at the moment. We have a API. I did this search a little earlier today. Hopefully, the bikes that we point to in the start and end is occupied and moved. So if I do a new search, I might get a new walk path to a new bike. This is e-scooter all the way. Here is a combination with a tram or a metro. And this is what we need this for, and this is also in our point of view what MMTS is about. We need this for route planning, and we will continue work on this. So in production today with GBFS, we have this included in the trip planning as access egress. We can show the price information, the battery status, availability. We show all available vehicles in a map. Ruter, a capital PTA in Oslo, show available vehicles on board screens on every buses. So when the bus is coming close to a stop, you see inside the screen on the bus how many e-scooters and city bikes there are close to that stop. And today we deep link to the operator's app for booking and unlocking the vehicle. We start now to support GBFS version 3.0 in the Mobility Hub. We do that together with mobility data and the community. We integrate price and lock through the TOMP API. We will integrate also this in the normal public transport part. Also there, we hope to use the TOMP API. The team for that is starting up just 2 weeks ago. And I hope that before summer, that the apps that use our trip planning API start to use this so it's available also for the citizens in Norway to get a e-scooter, shared car, or city bike as part of the public transport trip. And to summarize, at NTUR we achieve all goals so far with GBFS. Do we need to add this complexity to the sector? Do we need to add more burdens on the micromobility actors? In Norway, they are threatened by different municipalities with tenders each summer. They get a few weeks knowledge if they are able to drive the next year or not. Do we need to reinvent the wheel? This works fine for the micromobility operators. It works well for the cities, and it works well for trip planning. And do we need to make an European proprietary solution, which blocking us for collaborating cross-continental? And I'm the biggest fan of NeTEx. And this is our conclusion so far. Open for questions and debate.
Okay, thank you very much, Brede.
Yeah, the last one is we can go pretty far if we go together. We like to collaborate.
That I can certify on. Any questions to Brede? Comments? I think maybe, is it fair to say that you have basically taking it on you to make the conversion on behalf of the industry? Like,
yeah.
Which is basically what is in the regulation, a obligation to the industry.
Yeah, if we need NeTEx in the Europe,
yeah,
you need to have someone is using it.
Yeah,
it's the same as Isabel talked about GBFS Flex. We have sort of solved that perfectly within NeTEx and have it in our system. Are ready to make a GBFS Flex export from our systems. But there are no one that have asked for it and using it at the moment. So, and I think as soon as some stakeholders want to use GBFS Flex, we will make that export from our system. And I think we think the same about NeTEx. But I hope that we, with GBFS, using that in Europe, can avoid making an European proprietary solution for it.
Yeah.
Because the users of that data will probably convert it back to GBFS in their systems anyway.
And there's a bit of discussion going on, or exchange on chat on what's cooking in France. Is that something that could be shared verbally?
Yeah, it can be shared verbally. Edwin was asking if something similar is going to France, and I replied that the 3 use cases I presented earlier today were the use cases where the group working in France is trying to see how to define a subset of NeTEx Part 5 and Siri for these use cases that I presented, that are mostly the aggregation of feeds in the same station, the representation of different types of offers and their management. So it goes very much more on the backbone of the system or the operating part of the system, but all have agreed that to keep GBFS in trip planning for now, as presented by Brother works, because this is how it is shown today in trip planning apps, MaaS application, or other maps.
Okie doke. Good. Last call for a immediate question to Breda. Otherwise, I think we will just rearrange for the panel discussion. So Breda, if you stop sharing.
Yes. Done.
And then I would like to have highlighted Pauline Scherrier from Voi and
Yes.
Petra Söderqvist, if you could come on with picture. And Isabella de Robert from Mobility Data and Tuto Type from IT for PT and Breda, which is going to be our panel.
Yes, I hope you can see me now. I can see that I have my camera on at least.
We see you.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, outside the parliament. Yeah.
So let's see. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, cool. I think, Pauline, now you are representing the one of the shared mobility actors who is going to live in this new domain. What have you learned today?
Yeah, I learned a lot. Hi, everyone. So Pauline, I work for Voi Technology, a Swedish e-scooter and e-bike company that was founded in 2018, I think. And I'm basically product manager in the company and in charge, among other things, of these questions of data sharing and integrations. So what happened for us was that we realized at the end of last year that we needed to comply with the MMTIS and start sharing static data in the NeTEx format as of December. So we put a team working on it that developed this format for us and then started to post it and upload it on different national access points back in December. So we operate in 12 countries, 9 of which are in the EU. So today we have uploaded it in most of the national access points. Feedback on this experience, it was quite complicated on two different sides. One of the aspects was the policy side. It was quite hard for us to really understand policy-wise what we needed to comply with, at which time, etc. And the second side was, of course, the technical side. We have used the data for PT, GBFS to NeTEx mapping, because what we use mostly is GBFS, so we're very at the forefront with that. But so we used the mapping. That was a big help already, but the technical team gave us feedback that the internal references between the different data fields in NeTEx were quite complicated. And then the second thing in the technical part was getting access to NAPs, because some of them had different profiles. And so being able to put and upload our data there proved quite complicated. It even was quite interesting. We are quite agnostic to NeTEx as a standpoint. We're super supportive and super happy to see all the work that the Commission is putting and is doing to regulate and harmonize mobility data to move and enable multimodality. But of course, it's time and cost on our end. So we want to see the benefit from it. And it was very interesting when uploading our NeTEx data on different national access points that some of them were not quite ready for it. Some of them even told us, please don't put that, just use GBFS. So that was quite interesting. So we're super interested now to see how much usage there is of it. So we're of course at the very start of it, And what we're very curious about is to see that, like, how many national access points are actually going to use it and how many calls we're going to have on this API.
Yeah. Was that the opening remarks?
From my end, yes.
Yeah, okay, cool. And I think that's kind of also gives some impressions on that when you are having the obligation to upload on several national access points, you experience some differences, which is kind of, why should we have that? I mean, we have 220 volts everywhere. Why should we have this difference in between the countries? But that's where we are. I would also like to go back to Petra just for the opening here and say, okay, what did you learn today?
Well, hello again, everybody. It's funny. I'm looking now at the time and thinking, oh, it was 3 hours since I gave my presentation, but I've learned so much. It feels like a full day conference, and I say this in the best possible way, because it's been very, very insightful as to well, from all the presentations and also following a little bit of the questions online, and I really also just want to go back to what Pauline was saying now from Void Technology. Thank you for your opening statements as well, because this is really valuable information from us at the Commission. I mean, to follow all the presentations and including, of course, also from, as was also mentioned a little bit before, not just the public stakeholders, but also the private stakeholders. And what I did not include in my presentation is that there was in 2019, we from the we at DG Move, we produced something called an implementation handbook that described a little